Let's get into this and a whole lot more with Joe Hildebrand, of course, from the Daily Telegraph, news.com.au. You can read him at skynews.com.au, and one of Jim Molan's colleagues who was in the chapel today, wonderful Holly Hughes, Liberal Senator from New South Wales. So, guys, again, just to the simple point, right? Again, do I think it's going to pass? Yes, I think the polling, all the rest of it, right? But why is Linda Burney saying crap like that? It's just sort of this arse-covering nonsense.
Look, I'm glad you think it's going to pass, because I've been sweating bullets over it increasingly every day that's gone by, I have to say. I think to be generous to Linda, I think what she's actually trying to say, I hope to God it's what she was trying to say, is that clearly there has to be an acute response to this. Clearly you can't have people roaming the streets, kids roaming the streets, picking fights, getting into trouble, vandalising stuff, because it's safer to do that than it is to be at home. Now, I've been to Alice Springs, I've seen these town camps, I've literally personally been attacked on the streets of Alice Springs myself, so I know how bad and complex this issue is. And there's no way, like a voice to Parliament would take probably a generation to solve all these problems, and that's being optimistic. I mean, that was Twiggy Forrest's hope, and he was considered a bit bullish. So I think what she's saying is, look, you can have all the booze bans in the world, and you need to have them there. Send in the army if you want to, sure, whatever. But clearly that is not a long-term solution. Clearly that is not something where you can say, oh, it's easy. We'll just have the army there forever. We'll just have alcohol bans there forever. So my feeling is very much that a voice would long-term prevent those or ameliorate those sorts of problems, because exactly the same voices that the government ignored when they were saying, hey, do not do this bad idea, would actually be enshrined, and they would have to be listened to, because what they were saying would be on the public record, would be on the parliamentary record, and the government, as Albo famously said, would be very, very brave to ignore that advice.
But again, it's this thing, Holly, where the local MP is an Indigenous woman. We saw at that press conference yesterday that it was only a Labor Party event. They weren't going to have Jacinta anywhere near it. God forbid, this is closed shop. Make sure we don't have the press conference outside, inside, media managed. Make sure it's all after 6 p.m. Bow on it. Australia Day, Australia Day. But we know the problem, right? And the multifaceted problem that the Howard government was trying to deal with back in Mal Brough days, right? We've had the generation of information about how to unscramble the egg. But when the building's on fire, you don't have to have a conversation about the root causes of the fire. You put the fire out. So put the fire out.
Look, the whole thing is extraordinary. And, I'm glad I'm sitting here between you two, because I don't agree that I think the voice is going to pass. I'm going to be that voice in the middle who I just don't think it's going to get there.
Majority of people watching right now will agree with you.
I don't think it's going to get there. I'm wearing red, white and blue tonight. Not America. I'm wearing the Australian flag because after I had a lovely Wednesday night with you last week and spoke about the wokeness of people going to work on Australia Day, etc., I was accused of being a racist white supremacist, which I found extraordinary and hilarious at the same time. So for those of you watching, red, white and blue, very much in it.
Hang on.
No. Hang on.
Okay,
White
good.
And the pearls.
And the pearls. I thought while I was sitting down, you at least got the pearls. No.
I was going to say, we always learn too much each week.
I know.
And I was worried about what the white was going to be, but thankfully it's the duds.
It's the jeans. But, the fact I did listen and watched and read what Linda Burney said today about, if we'd had this voice, it never would have occurred. Well, let me tell you, if they hadn't abolished the cashless debit card, they wouldn't be having this problem. If they hadn't abandoned what was in place with the booze bust and handed it over the states and then said, Northern Territory, it's up to you, this wouldn't be happening. And we know that. And Linda Burney then was trying to walk it back, saying, but I've been in constant contact with these locals on the ground. I've been talking to these groups, all of whom had written to her and said, please keep the booze ban in place. And they had ignored that. So this fantasy that they're living in, that somehow, the voice is going to remove these issues. But as, Joe, you just said, it'll be enshrined in Parliament. Well, will it? We don't know what the voice is going to do. Is it a backroom advisory to the executive?
Well, no, I don't think it is. I think this is the whole problem.
We don't know what it is. So it's not enshrined in Hansard.
The people that the government has been listening to, or the governments have been listening to, when it comes to things like the cashless debit cards and it comes to things like the booze ban. No, but they're listening to Indigenous people. They're consulting. But they're just consulting the wrong people. They're consulting the ones who say, it's racist, it's discriminating. So they're not actually listening to the people on the ground who are saying, fire over here.
I sat on the committee last term that looked over cashless debit card. went to Alice Springs, went into communities, went to Darwin, went through the Northern Territory, talking to communities about the cashless debit card. We had Indigenous women come to those inquiries in tears.
I know, yeah.
Please do not remove this because we are not humbugged. We do not get abused for our welfare checks. We actually can provide school equipment. We can provide fresh food for our children.
Exactly.
And
So enshrine their voice, empower that voice.
Yes, but on
instead
an
of the campus
ideological
academics
bent,
who were saying,
the Labor
this is no
Party
good, and
were
go off and go
absolutely
vote for
hell-bent
Greens.
on getting rid of the cashless debit card.
Yes.
They didn't listen to these
That's
women
right.
because
That's the
those
problem we're
Indigenous
trying to
voices
fix.
don't count. No. Those Indigenous
That's why we've got to make
voices-
them count.
But
That's
they
the whole
don't
point.
count. Who are these
That's
voices?
right. That's the whole point.
We're in
That's why we've
fierce
got to fix
agreement,
it.
and that's why I think the voice is going to fail.
So put
because it
them front
won't
and centre
represent.
and put the usual
But it
suspects,
won't
the
be,
academics.
because it'll be the paid people that, as Julian Lisa said, is in the Langton report that the 2 co-chairs will be paid positions, that Albo didn't know the details. Those paid positions, I could bet you bottom dollar, they're going to come from inner city Melbourne and inner city Sydney. They are not going to represent.
there
Alice
will be
Springs.
representation
They are
from
not going to
remote
represent people in
areas. There will
Moree.
be.
They
That's
are
the whole
not
point
going
of
to.
it.
Well, I am yet to see the details.
look,
to know that.
maybe you know.
Sorry,
once-
Paul. I realise this is your show.
Maybe
but we're a bit busy.
maybe once it gets up, but the whole point of it is to empower those remote and regional communities. And I agree, there's always a threat that you know, put the
You
usual
don't think
suspects.
it's going to be
will
the
try to-
Lydia Thorpe screamers that are going to be on there?
They are
Putting their hand out
already
and
running the
representing-
show. They are already in
Joe.
charge. That is why we're here.
Well, I don't
That-
think the
that
voice is
who
gonna change
Governments
that.
have been
Okay, so
listening
Joe.
to.
A couple of
instead
lines in the Constitution is not going to give those genuine women out in Indigenous communities who are crying out for help, who are crying out for reduction in sexual
okay.
I
Well,
am
if
going to
it
host
says
now.
the
I am going to host now.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Super fast, right? Because
Yes,
there's a
sorry.
couple of things I want to get to. As a person who wants it to happen,
Yep.
are you more worried about the arguments of Holly, or are you more worried about the arguments of Lydia Thorpe?
I'm more worried about Lydia Thorpe. I'm more worried about the pay the rent people so people think if I vote for the Voice, then we suddenly have to pay reparations. I'm more worried about Zali Steggall going and saying, well, if they vote no, we'll just legislate it anyway. So people think either A, well, they're just going to do it anyway, so why bother voting at all? Or B, well, I was going to vote for it, but because you've just told me that my vote means nothing, I'm going to go screw you and vote against you just for trying to tell me what to do or to tell me that my vote doesn't matter. So all the things I'm most worried about is it's exactly the same with the Republic. Who killed the Republic? It wasn't the monarchists. It was the direct election
election
led by Phil Cleary.
Yep.
Like, you know, call him a proto-teal. And now the teals are doing... And the
Ted Mack.
And now
Old
they're
mate
doing the
Ted
same.
Mack.
So all these people, all these idiots on the fringes saying either A, we're going to make it even more radical, it has to be feared, all that sort of language, saying that we're just going to do it anyway because you dumb, racist, redneck plebs don't know how to vote properly.
But isn't that why the detail's important?
All that stuff is terrible. I thought, look, there needs to be a degree of detail, obviously. There also just needs to be, it's not up to ordinary people. We have a system of devolved representation where we're not expected to write legislation ourselves. That's what the Parliament for. When you went to
Just a
vote
quick
for
PowerPoint presentation and a flow chart
that's
might
right.
be appreciated.
Just 3 dot points.
Yeah, that's all we need, all right?
Nice.
All right. There was other stuff, but that was a better conversation than
Sorry.
anything else we were going to do. Do appreciate it. Thank you very much, guys.
Love you to
Senator,
death.
future
Love you
Senator,
both.
he's fighting the fight.